So we're now in the Teach section of Mark Plan Teach. If you've got the book, then great. If not, you've got the resources online that you can download to support you watching the video. Let me just frame the objectives. What I would like to discuss is how teachers, if we plan questions and template them, one, we can support students better, but actually we can reduce our workload. And the second point I want to advocate is how can we look at more qualitative approaches to supporting teachers in the profession that will allow them to open doors and share with one another rather than doing the total opposite, which is pushing people out of the profession or closing doors and not working with one another. So let's start with a bit of research. So the first thing I want to just tackle is a bit of question research. So in Mark Plan Teach, page 141, or if you don't have the book, you can download the available synopsis. Let's just talk about one or two of these on the screen. So misconceptions. If I don't ask my children a question in the class, I'm not sure if they understand the information. If I ask the students what the colours are in the rainbow and they all get it wrong, then I know straight away that I need to teach that material again. The second point is I want to look at, deep questioning but self-regulation. What we're ultimately trying to do as teachers is get students to a place where they can self-regulate. One, they can behave better. Two, they can work with other people. Three, they might access a piece of material and they understand it, and then they can start to lead to their own solutions. That's ultimately what we're trying to do. So, in the Teach section of Mark Plan Teach, and again, if you don't have the book, you can download the resources. How can teaching psychologically transform into learning? So in the Teach section, so it's the last section of the book, chapter 2, I just want to talk about this idea. Now, education's full of acronyms, but I'm going to squeeze in one more. Now, this is one I've used for nearly 3 decades. MINT. It stands for this: materials, in or out of seats, noise level, and time. And this is how it would work in the classroom. Now, this is about me scripting instructions so that I'm clear and precise and students focus on the detail rather than get lost. So here's how it works. So on the screen you'll see, I'm going to say to students that for the materials part, you've got this piece of A3 paper, you'll need a pen or a pencil, and this pink worksheet to support your work. You're going to be out of your seats, moving around the classroom looking at the displays on the wall. The noise level is quiet conversations working in your groups. You've got 7 minutes, and I'll give you a 1-minute reminder at the end, and then you need to come back and sit down. Off you go. As soon as I ask any questions, Ross puts his hand up in the corner and says, "Sir, Sean's stolen my pencil," or "Sir, did you watch the football last night?" And immediately I lose the impetus of my scripted instructions. I lose clarity. The best approach is off you go, students, and as the students off the go, I then use that time available to clarify misconceptions. So I navigate the classroom and I talk to individual students, and I can then manage the disruption in another way. So why don't you just have a moment, pause the video, and think about not how you get students' attention. So for example, 1, 2, 3 eyes on me, that's for engagement. How do you deliver key instructions to your students? What's your methodology? So we're going to look at an idea called hinge question. This is a great assessment for learning strategy for asking children questions in lesson. How it's used is testing what students already know. So the principle is this: a good hinge question typically has 4 choices. Now, if you look at the details on the screen here, you'll see that A is there are right answer. B, if I move the goalpost, so again, if I ask you how many balloons can you fit into this classroom, and then I suddenly say how many water balloons or how many hot air balloons, the answer changes. C could be an almost right answer, then D is a definite wrong answer. So there's just an example. So on the screen, I'm going to pose a Fermi question. So I'm asking a statistical question, how many? But I'm going to ask you to give me what you think you know. Now, in the classroom world, this will be based on what you've taught the kids and what you think they already know. So this is a great assessment for learning strategy that you can use at any point in the lesson. It's very good for testing what students already know in terms of retrieving information. So here's an example for you on the screen. I want you to pause it, discuss, or if you're working on your own, I want you to simply work out what's the most obvious correct answer and what's the most obvious wrong answer. How many baked beans are in one tin of baked beans? So you've got 4 choices on the screen. So pause the video, have a quick discussion. So now you've had a chance to discuss the answer, let me just go through the various possibilities. Having taught food technology my entire career, just to be very clear about subject knowledge here, food is measured in weight, not quantity of beans. So that's the first clarification, but let's put that aside for a moment. If I said to you it's a small square microwave pot of beans, suddenly the goalposts change and the answer would be about 75 beans. We do know already that even if it's a normal aluminium tin or even a half a tin, that 5,000 is probably the most obvious answer that would be wrong. So what I would like you to do, in your pack that you can download, you've got a template. I want you to design a hinge question activity for your children in your classroom. Pitch a question that gives the children 4 responses. One answer is definitely right, one answer is definitely wrong, and the other 2 answers could be right, depending on the possibility or the context of the question. So let me give you a simple example. Let's say I'm teaching students in a PE lesson and I want a settling activity at the start of the lesson. I put on the screen, how many times have Manchester United won the Premier League title? So the choices I would give, the choices would be 5,000, 20, 38 or 39. So pause the video and let me know your answer. So let's come back to the answer and how hinge questions work. So an assessment for learning technique, it's testing what students already know and throwing in a few curveballs. So just for clarity, 5,000 is the obvious wrong answer. 20 is the correct answer if we're talking about the Premier League in its current form. But if we consider the old history of the Football League, Manchester United have won the league 38 times. I could add 39 as another possibility if they win the league this year. Now, I'm not a Manchester United fan, but I'm just putting that one in there as a simple example. How could you design a curriculum example based on what you've taught the students and what you want them to know? So let's just take a moment to look at the psychology and a contribution from Tim in terms of what happens in our memory. So on page 111, if you've got a copy of Mark Plan Teach, or if you don't, you can download the synopsis. Here we've got an insight from Tim as to what happens when we teach students material and what happens in their memory. So I'm not a psychologist, but if I could just highlight what Tim's written here in this fascinating part of the book. The memory is malleable, and when we recall something, it then connects our memory or an association. So I'll give you one example. If I said to you, have you ever been to New York? All of a sudden your memory is thinking about New York. Now, some of you watching this video will have been to New York. Others will recall information they've seen on the television or radio or from when their friends have visited New York and looking at pictures on Facebook. What you're then doing is building up a picture of what you believe New York to be, rather than a concrete example of when people have actually physically been to New York and have a better understanding of what's in their memory. So it's just something to consider. Cognitive scientists will call this dual coding, where we're looking at various different information to channel and help support students in their learning. So one more point I just want to highlight from the screen. Tim talks about learning where it requires memory, remembering and sometimes forgetting so that we can retrieve that information. Again, a top tip, regular low-stake testing in class is a good way to ensure that information stores in children's long-term memory. I'll give you one simple example. If I ask you to recall the following numbers for me, 2511, I want you to repeat that to me please. So 2511, good. 251173, okay, so let's do a bit more. 2511731505. What we'll find now is if I ask you to repeat that information to me, 2511731505, it's easy for me because it's in my long-term memory. That's my date of birth and the time that I've been born. Another example is if I give you a series of numbers and ask you to repeat these back. So here we go, 1914, 1918, 1939, 1945. Pause the video, could you tell me back those numbers? Some history teachers might be able to recall this information and dual code it in another way. So if I said suddenly 1914 to 1918, 1939 to 1945, all of a sudden the information is easier to remember. We've chunked the information in different ways. There's a good chance that it will store in our long-term memory. So please consider that when you teach information. Think about how you can chunk the information into ways that it becomes more memorable. So let's move on to another idea. Pose, pause, pounce, bounce. It's a bit of a mouthful, PPPB, and let me just explain it. So this is an idea I discovered from working with Pam Fernley, highlighted by Professor Dylan William about 10 years ago. I wrote an article about it when I first started to become interested in cartoons. Now you might think, why? Well, when I became a dad, I suddenly had to watch Winnie the Pooh, for example, cartoons that I watched as a child, but suddenly I'm watching them as an adult. If we just think about the characters in Winnie the Pooh, for example, if we look at any of the characters on the screen, if we just take Al for an example, Al's wise, sometimes a bit sarcastic, thinks they know everything, or if we take Rabbit, a bit thoughtless, a bit careless, makes mistakes, or if we think of the scenes where Tigger appears, suddenly the scene turns into chaos. And what generally happens is Tigger will be bouncing. So if we just go back to the original slide, in terms of a questioning strategy, pose, pause, pounce, bounce looks at all the research and ideas that I've already shared in the teach part of these videos. I pose a question to the children, I wait 5 seconds, I create a climate in my classroom where I've insisted that hands are down, all students are thinking about the question. I'm going to ask any of them at any time, but the pause part's important. How many balloons can you fit in this classroom? I wait 5 seconds. I then say, Ross, what's the answer? And then I pounce Ross's response to another student and ask them to expand, agree, disagree, etc., etc. And then I facilitate a discussion in the classroom. This is how pose, pause, pounce, bounce works in principle. So now I'd like you to watch this short video by Professor Dylan William, who explains how assessment for learning using the pose, pause, pounce, bounce technique is a much better strategy to use in classrooms to ensure that all students are engaged. So you can watch this video on YouTube, type in Dylan William, type in pose, pause, pounce, bounce, type in elicit evidence of achievement, and you'll probably find this video. I will link it on the resources online. So what we found in Dylan's video is that initiate, response, evaluate, that IRE process, this is how teachers meet the needs of children on their feet. I ask a question in class, I respond to what they say, I evaluate, and then I decide where to go next in terms of my teaching. This is true assessment for learning. It's not where we colour code spreadsheets or we ask 30 questions to 30 different children. True assessment for learning is when we adapt to meet the needs of children on our feet. And pose, pause, pounce, bounce, as Dylan Williams quite rightly highlighted, is a very effective questioning strategy. So why should teachers question? Well, there's 4 reasons. 1, I need to clarify what I want students to learn. I want to challenge their assumptions. I want to also gather their views to retrieve information from them. And then it allows me to predict what I need to reteach. I believe questioning is the most effective strategy a teacher can use in the classroom. So what I would like you to do, on your own or in groups, there is a resource that you can download that on the left-hand side of the screen you'll see a series of questions that I've planned for one scheme of work. So the first thing I would like you to do is use the pose, pause, pounce, bounce methodology. Look at the questions and think, how could you ask these questions in class? And when you seek a student response after the pause moment, what further question could you then ask? Whether it's agree, disagree, explain more, what do you think, or another question. The second thing I want you to consider is, do you have a scheme of work where you have planned all the questions that you can ask children for this entire piece of work? Let's move on to another questioning technique called cold call. Now, cold calling comes from Teach Like a Champion, written by Doug Lemov. Now, there's a video here I'd like you to find on YouTube. So if you just search for Teach Like a Champion and cold call, you'll find this one video. Now, before you watch it, I want you to just consider several things. Now, when I trained to be a teacher, we learnt the psychology body language and how what we do or say or move can impact on learning. When you watch this video, you'll see the teacher regularly ask questions, quick fire questions about things that the children already know. I want you to focus in on the child sitting in the middle. Her name is Dia, and I want you to look carefully when the teacher asks Dia a question twice in a row. So now, having watched the first cold call video, if I ask you what happened to Dia when the teacher asked her a question twice in a row, you'll notice several things. One, Dia switches off after the first question, and when Miss asks her a second question, her cognitive reflex is to thrust her body forward because she has to suddenly recall the information. Notice this is information that she's already been taught. She already knows the information, the student, but she was not expecting Miss to ask her the question for the second time. So here's another video, cold call. So on YouTube, if you can search for Teach Like a Champion, the teacher's name is Jessie Rector, a maths lesson. Pause my video and then watch this clip on YouTube, and let's just see what happens in this classroom. So now you've watched this video, you'll understand where the teacher is asking the students a question where they have to work it out in their working memory. This is based on information that they already know. So how this is summed up in Teach Like a Champion, there's 5 points here. Students could be sitting or standing, it doesn't matter, it's a routine. You decide what works best in your classroom, but students must be ready, they must be listening. The effectiveness of this strategy is students know it's coming, they're going to be called upon at any time. Cold call, like any teaching strategy, is students must understand how it works. It means they have to be ready. And when we look at the maths example, they're working out quite rigorous problems, two-step problems in some cases. They're hard, but it's a routine and it's testing what students already know. More importantly, all students can be called upon at any time, which I think makes it a brilliant strategy. So if I was with you and leading this training in your school, I would ask you right now to stand up, because I would want to model cold call. I'd also want to test that learning's emotional, and I'd want to test the information that I've already shared with you in these videos to see if it has stuck. If it hasn't stuck, then I know I need to reteach it again. So we're all learners. I would ask you to stand up. Suddenly you would all be feeling quite emotional, worried that you're going to be asked information that you don't know. So what I would ask you here to do, because I'm not in the room, pause the video. Could someone look at the questions beforehand and then display the questions to the rest of the audience in the room? If you're watching this video on your own, then I would expect you to be able to answer all the questions. So here we go, cold call by Teacher Toolkit. So I want to just check that you've remembered the information I've taught you in the other videos. So my first question, what is stickability? So I'm either going to give you 1 second or 5 seconds. And in the room, if you've got 1 second to think about this and I'm asking for a piece of information in front of your peers, there's a chance you're going to feel quite emotional and be challenged. If I give you 5 seconds to think about the question, then you have more time to process and recall what you think you remember. So here's another example. Let's wait 5 seconds after we ask this question. Question 2, what effect size does filming yourself have on student outcomes? Now the correct answer here is 0.88 according to John Hattie research. But if you didn't know the answer, then I could argue that you haven't seen the video before or you've forgotten the information. So one more, what is yellow box? How does it work? So I would explain the idea in principle before. Now we're working through Mark Plan Teach content. I'm asking you now, how does it work? If it's a great marking strategy, I'm advocating all of us to use it. I want to know that you know how to use it. Now the first 3 questions are based on things that I've already taught you in Mark Plan Teach. But for the sake of this demonstration, here are some other questions that you could use as a cold call strategy. Now I've used generic questions. What is the capital city of Italy? I'll stop talking. I'll play the rest of the videos. You work out in the room. Are you going to wait 1 second or 5 seconds? Are you going to ask one person to respond or the whole class to respond? So here we go. Are dolphins mammals or fish? What is the most commonly spoken language in the world? Where is Timbuktu? What is the longest river in the world? Which country has the second largest population? And how many days left until Brexit? So yes, they're a bit fun questions. Think again how you could ask these questions related to the curriculum that you're teaching in the classroom. If I'm using this strategy, then I'm going to encourage all students to be participating all of the time rather than some of the time. Here's another great idea from Doug Lamoff's Teach Like a Champion. It's called No Opt-Out, and it's very similar to the pose, pause, pounce, bounce technique that we've already shared. So in here, you've got a video, so I want you to just go onto YouTube and search for Teach Like a Champion, No Opt-Out, and find this video, then pause my video and then watch this on YouTube, and then we'll come back to the content. So having watched the video, you'll have noticed there's two clips in one. The first teacher allows students to put hands up, and then she asks the students who put their hands up. In that clip, the students are dominating learning. In the second clip, you'll notice that the teacher forces students to have their hands down. And in both videos, although the first student gets the answer maybe wrong or it's lacking in detail, the teacher comes back to the original student to ask for more detail, having navigated the question around the classroom. So how it works, we have 3 points here. So the first point is I pose a question and I move around after navigating with a student. Some students might say I'm not willing to answer or I don't know. You as a teacher have to decide, student motivation, self-esteem, how much you're willing to stay with that student and put them under pressure to recall the information. But if you get a response, you then move on to another student. The discussion then ends when you go back to the first student and you ask them for a more enriched response. And I believe even though the second video is stronger than the first, in both videos you'll see that the original answer is more enriched after navigating around the classroom. So why not try the no opt-out technique in your classroom? So what I would do here is if I was with you and I was leading this training, I would ask you to stand up. Again, you can do it sitting down, but if you're on your own, then obviously answer the question by yourself. But if you're in a group of people, the person leading the training session, could you pause the video and then you're going to pose the question to whoever you choose in the room. So what I'm going to use here is the cold call technique and the no opt-out technique. So whether you're standing or sitting, cold call is I'm going to ask anybody at any time and I expect you to know the answer. No opt-out, if you get the answer wrong, I'm going to come back to you or I'm going to want a more enriched response. Now, if you've watched the other videos in this series, I'm going to also use the Fermi question technique where I ask a statistical question. I'm going to ask how many. So here we go, you need to manage this, so hopefully the person leading the session has already watched this, pause it, you decide how to play it, but here we go. Please can you read the following sentence by yourself? So finished files are the result of years of scientific study combined with the experience of years. So it's a meaningless sentence, but we can read it. What I might do in the classroom is I might ask students to repeat it with me so that they practice how to speak and how to articulate using the words. If I don't get them to practice, then I don't know if they can say these words. But here's my question. How many letter Fs do you see in the sentence? Pause the video and give yourself just 10 seconds. So the correct answer is 6. So whether you're watching this on your own or in a room full of people, let me just explain why there are 6. So most of you will have said 3 or 4, maybe one person might have said 6, but whatever the response is, if you got it wrong, I would come back to you and ask you to recall the correct answer now that we know. So we're all teachers of literacy, so firstly allow me to explain what's happened here. The fox sound has a particular sound. OV, of, has a different type of sound. So in the world of phonics, that's how we pick up those Fs. But also you've experienced here what's called the redundancy effect. Because of is such a small, insignificant word, our memory, our brain, our working memory thinks it's not important, so it becomes redundant, so we ignore it. You may want to experiment with the word in one long line and see how the results appear, but generally that's what happens. So there's a few things I've done here. One, when I ask this question, you can cope with reading the sentence, but when I then add how many letter Fs, if I wait 1 second in the classroom or wait 5 seconds, I'm putting you under pressure. If this is new information, it's not in your long-term memory, so it's even harder to process. If it's in your long-term memory and you've seen this before, there's a good chance you can recall it when I ask you the same question in a week or a month or a year's time. It's very important that I regularly check. So what we've experienced here is redundancy effect. We discard information that we don't think is important. So I'm about to show you an image on the screen, and when I do, I want you to look at the left-hand side first before you look at the right-hand side. So here we go. So you've had a few moments to look at the left-hand side. So you'll see a teacher or a speaker at a conference, picture of a bear and honey. The speaker or teacher will say, bears enjoy eating honey. There's an image of bears and honey, and it's also written on the text inside the slide. There's too much information here, presented all at once. What happens is your working memory is overloaded, particularly if you've not seen this information before. But if we look on the right-hand side now, you can see that the teacher might say, bears like eating honey. I might place a jar of honey and a cuddly bear on the children's tables so that they have a concrete example to look at. I'll then say it. I'll ask the students to repeat it to me. Bears enjoy eating honey. I'll ask Ross, bears enjoy eating honey, Mr. McGill. And then I use so many different ways to dual code that information. Now it's important here, context. Year 1, year 11, special needs children, students with visually impaired or hearing, whatever it would be, you have to decide how you channel the information in different ways. But be conscious of when you give too much information all at once, working memory becomes overloaded and therefore less effective. So let's move on to the last teaching strategy, the question matrix. Now this idea has evolved from all the different question resources I've already showed you and from some ideas I've shared on my social media channels. How it works is to pose deeper questions that require deeper responses and to also encourage a rich and quality dialogue in the classroom. And how you manage this is another matter. Rather than Ross calling out, you will have to manage this. But here's the principle. You start off with this grid. We look at the left-hand side first. So we've got a what, where, when, which going down the left-hand side of the page. On the top right, we've got is, has, can, should, would, could, will, and might. So what I would do in the top left-hand area, I would pose a question, what is, what has, what can, and so forth. And this follows Bloom's taxonomy. Knowledge is equally as important as synthesis and evaluation, so it's important to consider what types of questions you might pose. If you're working with primary students, you might want to make the grid a bit smaller. Rather than a big grid like this, you might want to just have a 4x4 or a 6x6 grid. But here's where the power of the resource lies. I add an image to the question matrix. So if we look on the screen now, here's a picture of some food. So if I choose the top left question area, what is, I can point to a resource on the image. I might say which olive oil should, so we look at where the questions are, which and should, which olive oil should I use for this salad dressing? Or if I go to the bottom left and the top right, how might chili affect the flavour of this food? We change the image, so a different subject, we've got English. So on here, if I introduce this as a first lesson, I could say to students, what is happening in this image? As we go through the scheme of work, we could ask, which person hit the man on the head? How did he lose his temper? How could we stop him losing his temper again? So the image prompts discussion. The questions allow you as a teacher to pitch questions. How you do that in the classroom is another matter. You pitch questions to various students. You could also ask the students to write the questions themselves based on the image. They can look at the resource, give them 5 or 6 minutes, and then you collect the questions back either physically or you ask students to pitch a question for the resource. So the rest of the slides, you've got 2 or 3 other examples. So here is a science example. Now in the science curriculum, we don't necessarily ask a who question. who invented Jupiter. So you might want to just consider the types of questions for your curriculum area. Another idea, health and social care, so a PSHE lesson or an assembly question. Put an image up of your school reception or your classroom environment or something in the big wide world. Another science question here, how is this bubbling? What happens when the water boils? We've got a volcano here. When will this volcano erupt? What has made it erupt? When will it happen again? Another image, so this is from the London riots. So how could we stop this happening again? What's happening in this image? What would happen to the shopkeeper? So what I would like you to do is use the question matrix resources that you've got to download. So you've got this image, so you can do two things here. You've got a blank one, or you've got this image that I'm giving you here. And you can do two things. One, either use the question matrix to design questions for your own lesson that you're teaching, or use this image that I'm providing you here to provoke a discussion with people watching this video. So what I'd like you to do for 5 or 6 minutes, could you just tackle the top left working to the bottom right, these green areas, could you write a question for the image that I've provided for you? If you're working on your own image, then just tackle the questions from top left to bottom right in the next 5 minutes, one question a box, off you go. So now you've had a chance to look at the question matrix in this image. What I've done here is I've put a grid over the image. If I'm using this on an ICT basis, I might hide and reveal various questions that I've already planned. I might say, Ross, these are your 3 questions you need to tackle in this lesson over a scheme of work. So in the next 2 or 3 weeks, Ross, you've got to answer all these. I might want to color code them or whatever way you think works best. There's other ways that you can use this too. I might want to create a big version of this matrix on the wall and have students add and take away post-it notes at the start or end of lessons. I can collect those questions. Another method is give the students the blank grid, stick it in the books, allow them to come up with their own questions or collect them yourself. If you're a primary teacher, you might want to reduce the grid, have a smaller set of questions. Any image works. It also works for your teaching and learning policies, your marking policies. If you're wise enough to remember what acetate looks like, you might want to print an acetate copy and put it over a student's piece of work or put it over something that you're doing in your school and just use it as a prompt to create discussion. So let's summarize what we've covered in the Teach videos. Number 1, direct instruction. So remember the MINT methodology, the scripting instructions. If I'm clear and precise, I script my instructions, I'm going to have a higher impact in terms of my children's outcomes. I'm clear, I don't get distracted, I don't allow students to distract me, I clarify misconceptions by navigating the room. Another technique, planned questions. So we know planned questions, Fermi questions, creative thinking. I might also consider wait time. Most teachers wait 1 second. Instead, next time you ask a question, wait 5. What it does, it allows students to think more logically and improve their language. Pose, pause, pounce, bounce. It's a great technique. Pose a question, pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I can wait a little bit more. There's a nice little mantra to say to yourself. Then pounce the question to a student and bounce their answer to somebody else. Cold call, no opt-out. 2 great techniques we saw from Teach Like a Champion from Doug Lamoff's work. When I cold call students, standing or sitting, it's testing retrieval practice based on the ideas and knowledge that they've already been taught and the information they know. The no opt-out, similar to pose, pause, pounce, bounce. If you get it wrong, I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to ask you for the correct information. Why is this important? Because if I don't do it in the safety of our classroom, it's going to be too late when they have to do it in the exam for performance. The final idea we've looked at is the question matrix. The question matrix is probably one of the greatest workload resources I've ever used as a teacher. I've got a grid with 30 or 40 questions. It's planned for a scheme of work. I can ask the students to complete the questions. I can complete the questions myself. I can refine them as I teach another scheme of work in the future. The point here is to plan all your questions, use all the different mechanisms, your children in class, your own schemes of work to plan questions that you can reap the benefit for in your classroom. It's a great workload tool and it's great for creating discussion in the classroom.